So ultimately, what I'm going to talk about is configuration management, but it goes above that with independent of the config itself, post-generation. Here we have a slide of a lot of different tools. Okay, so the reality is it doesn't necessarily matter for us, which platforms are being used. Right? At the end of the day, what we believe is if it's deployed and not used, it's a lose-lose, especially if we help deploy it, right? We've seen that in the past, over the past 20 years, that a lot of NMS systems were deployed, never logged into, or maybe used for the bare minimum of SNMP polling, as an example. So what we really want to do now is focus in around the consumption layer of configuration management, but as even Damien pointed out, things like chat for read-only operational workflows. So here's now a different take on the previous one, where there's different types of tools built for different types of people to consume. Right? We definitely see on the bottom tier, these are tools that more often than not are consumed by networking teams or IT teams. Now, when you start bringing up workflows and higher level systems, you might want to expose things, again, if it's chat, ticketing systems, even collecting data, Confluence and wikis, pretty awesome to be able to collect data and write through a Confluence API directly into a wiki so you can see existing state, if that makes sense for a given environment. And that's why a lot of times the responses in the past hour and a half have been, it depends. And the truth is, it depends on the systems that are deployed already. And oftentimes, if we recommend something, there could be no chance of it happening in a global organization or a highly political organization, I'll say. So, if they have things like wikis, let's use it. Because if we start using things like this, it actually makes the development time even faster to deploy, because then we're using current RBAC controls that already exist, who can access certain pages and things like that. So ultimately, what I'm going to walk through is several different demos, okay? Each of these demos is going to be driven from the UI that we're seeing here, right? So we're going to start with ServiceNow, look at what it's like to create a ticket, walk through the process of executing a change sourced from ServiceNow. At the same time, look at things like chat. Again, go into more detail on what's possible with chat programs. And then NetBox is mentioned a little bit already. We'll go into more detail for the last 30 minutes today, but we'll also see how you could initiate a change even directly from NetBox as well, and then Ansible along the way is being used as the engine. Okay. Now what I'll do now is go into the first demo of ServiceNow. I apologize. I'm using a Mac today. My Lenovo wouldn't connect via HDMI, so bear with me. I'll try the 3-finger or 4-finger swipe to try to get my windows here. But let's see here. Okay, cool. So this was Damien's. Let's see. Okay, cool. This is going to be right here. Okay, so what we're seeing here is our ServiceNow portal. So we're going to log in, and this is our typical ticketing system, right? There's going to be a CMDB in here. And so different schools of thought, right? Some clients want to have CMDB in here. Other clients will choose to use something like a NetBox, but still sync that into ServiceNow so you can use that as you're going to initiate changes. So top left, everything we're seeing here on inventory, sites, and domains, fully tailored for a given environment. For the demos we'll initiate from ServiceNow, we're going to keep it extremely simple and basic, just provisioning a VLAN as an example. So this could be statically defined in ServiceNow or even synchronized from NetBox. But maybe we'll pick a domain first. We'll say data center. We're going to choose one of our Nexus switches, and then we're just going to put in here a VLAN name. Maybe we'll just put NFD21, VLAN ID 200, and then maybe we'll just do some notes here. Notes. And before I click submit, I do want to make sure we're logged into the backend system. This is going to execute from Ansible. And keep in mind, the tools that we work on vary in shape and size, commercial, open source. To us, it doesn't matter, right? It's really finding the right tool and the right platform that will be best used from an organization. So we're logged in here. Now what we have is a pre-approved change box. A lot of our clients might follow ITIL. You might have standard changes, pre-approved changes, things like that. For the demo, we're going to click this. That way, when I click submit, it will execute immediately in Ansible. We click submit. At this point, a change request is going to get opened, and we'll just go to all change requests. We'll bounce back and forth the tower. And let's see here. Cool. So now we have our job on the top getting kicked off. We see the little blinky green that the job is now running. This is where it gets really interesting. If we were to look at our open change, our top one over here, we're going to see all the data from the notes that when we click submit. If we click the notes tab, what we're going to see is an update come right back into the ticket every step along the way. So ultimately, this job is going to feed back various notes into the ticket to be able to tell us how that job is flowing. All right, so we still see it running, and ultimately, cool. So we saw this update. I think through the wireless maybe. It took a little second. We have a link to Ansible in the ticket, so we can click this link, navigate back to the automation engine, and watch that job run. And we're also populating that data into a NetBox as well. So if we were still on NetBox, we go to VLANs, we are going to see the NFD VLAN as well. So just keep in mind, there's various things and data is a hard problem to solve, but here we're using ServiceNow to initiate it, populating source of truth, and making that change. At this point in time, the notes that we're going to see in the ticket are totally customizable, based on what makes sense in a given organization. So we'll talk a lot about pre and post change. What is done pre-change, what is done post-change. Oftentimes there are guidelines and best practices for a given change type, and oftentimes it's up to the engineer during the change window to actually implement them. So what we're seeing here again could be too much testing on our side, slowing down our systems, but I'll do a refresh. I'll just do a quick refresh with the wireless to see if that's going to help us. Okay, cool. So that's what it was. My system, just a little bit on the wireless side. So we have pre-change, a show VLAN as an example, change in progress. So everything you would want to know if a network engineer is making a change, we're writing back into the ticket. The build process as an example, and then we're going to have our post-change commands verifying it was there, and then finally, we can do a text diff showing what the before and after were. This is a basic pre and post change. If you want to get more complex, looking at size of routing tables, active adjacencies, look at structured data instead of doing a diff, all that is possible. And all of that logic here is actually in the playbook. Right? So this is really just a shim layer between ServiceNow and Ansible, and the automation engine itself, whatever logic to make this more realistic for a production environment, we can add into that given workflow. So this one was a pre-approved change. We ran it immediately when I clicked submit. Now we also have a different tab on the left called Manage VLANs two-step. Again, a lot of clients want to have certain deviations for their given environment, so we'll just do same device here, VLAN name. Let's just say we'll just do TFD there, and then we'll say 200 more notes. This one is still going to kick off immediately, but we're going to see a slight difference in terms of the job that'll run within Ansible. To highlight the difference, this is going to initiate the build process only. In the build process, for our ticket notes, this was just generating the configuration that would get sent, but it's not going to actually send it to the device. And so if we come back to our change requests, the last one up here, come back into our notes, and I'll keep refreshing just to make sure we see it as it happens. We are going to see the two commands generated, VLAN ID and name. What we're also seeing up here is change waiting for approval. This is where somebody else would log into the system to approve it, and then on approval, it would then run the job to do the deployment. So we see our commands in here. At this point, we would see our job is technically done within Ansible, and then if I wanted to impersonate our user, our approver, which is Fred Luddy, right? So now Fred is going to have to approve this twice. This is for our demo. In production, it could be two separate people, two separate teams, really, really doesn't matter, right? So as soon as we click approve, what we're going to see here is, well, actually two things. I'll show the ticket first. So let me log out of ServiceNow, go back to our sysadmin. This is like the requester that we're mimicking here, and come back to our open change requests. Was it 602? Yeah, that was TFD. And then so we saw Fred approve it. At this point, it's the same exact workflow as the previous one. So now it'll deploy the commands that were generated and deploy it. So far, two workflows. The clients dictate the business process, how many approvals you need, who has to approve it, and then each one of those is mapped back to a predictable and defined. Here, it's a playbook, but it could be a script, could be a job, another system with an API. It just hooks into the ServiceNow under the covers.
How long did it take to develop all the code and test all the code to do this type of a workflow, creating a VLAN, which we'll say I never say something's easy, but this is a simplistic kind of workflow. How long did that take to develop? Like a week? Is it more than a week? Is it a few days? Like if somebody asked you, obviously to do it again, you had the experience of now doing it.
Right.
So I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, and that's part of it. Once the experience is there, obviously it accelerates. So under the covers here, as an example, if we start bottoms up, if we go bottoms up, we have a playbook to a device. So if we started there, that playbook is using Ansible. So we're writing a playbook in YAML, and that playbook, again, could be a basic playbook that literally deploys two commands. One like ours will do a pre, it'll gather, it'll do a post, do a diff, write it back to a ticket. And so, I think in general, playbooks can be literally one task, or it could be 1,000 tasks. So playbook development, it could be a day, it could be a month. It's all a matter of, do you want automatic rollback if there's a fail? All these things, testing for, all these things add to the time, and ServiceNow integrations as well. So here, one of the things that we see within our client base is to, look at the ServiceNow development and the network automation development with an Ansible, and look at where do you want logic to be. And what we do see is a lot of our clients rather have that logic in Ansible because they can control it in their own domain. That way, it's some API calls to initiate things, and that does accelerate things. So the ServiceNow development here isn't again overly complex with some basic tables and forms. But at the end of the day, when we look at CMDB, inventory sync, that also adds quite a bit of time. So not a definitive answer, but as always, it's gonna.
But it's like it's not like a day or two. It's like
if it's the first one with an organization, I think weeks is a good estimate. If it's the first one, after that you get a feel for what's going to make sense, and then we kind of minimize and accelerate going forward.
Can you give me an idea of when you're breaking down something like a ServiceNow integration? There's obviously points of validating data that's coming in, right? ServiceNow is going to take whatever data you put in that screen.
Yeah.
Right. So that's part of the structural problem of what sort of workflow intelligence do you build? Obviously, Ansible, we can do the data checks and validations on the backside, and then push that forward. But how do you think about that? How do you work through with customers? You should invest some time in the upfront doing things like data validation, making sure, and is 200 a VLAN you can actually create?
Yeah, Bobo.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. Or should you never touch it? Is it an executive or is it critical system?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you walk people through that? Because that's, to me, is a much harder discussion than actually doing the back some of the back actual configuration.
Yeah. So I think again, even if we go bottoms up, in this demo, Ansible's controlling the communication to the device. So we definitely, I would say, still want some back end tests to make sure that, because again, other systems could be calling Ansible as well, not just ServiceNow. So I think having those checks there makes sense. And we have some of those checks in here for some assertions to ensure there's valid data. On the ServiceNow side of things here, it varies widely. Again, this is a common demo that we give, and again, what we hear is, could we add VLANs to a VLAN CMDB first, and then if it's in there, then have that be a picker for a VLAN, 100%.
Okay.
And so, all of that, again, it could be added to NetBox first, and then, sync to ServiceNow. So the actual data management, as John was alluding to, it's actually a very deep conversation. And, but yeah.
But it gets back to the single point of of truth around where specifically that falls in, because this is really just a presentation layer of like putting a request.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly. Yep. Cool. So one more I'm not going to execute in terms of time is just things. Start thinking about enabling other teams. So these are Jack IDs. If you look under your cube in the office, you might have a Jack ID to reference that ultimately should reference an IDF closet, a port, as an example. Again, is that data correct? Somebody in the cabling closet, troubleshooting one time. But if there's good data around mapping people to locations and ports, enabling a level 1 team or a help desk team, you can have your Jack ID and your device type. So that way you don't have to worry about which location, which switch, which interface, and things like that. So those two workflows around VLANs and help desk, if we jump back into the Slack, as Damien showed earlier, all of those could map directly into chat commands. As an example, if we did /net, we're going to see a whole list of chat commands within Slack. So if we said we're going to do net add VLAN, we're now going to see pop-ups directly in chat to be able to do pick your device, pick your VLAN, click submit. So if we were to pick this Nexus switch VLAN name, let's just throw web 001 VLAN ID. Actually, we'll just do 201 here, click submit. This is now going to go issue and configure that VLAN. Same workflow. So in this process, if we come back here, we're now going to see another job get executed. Initiated pop-up via chat, running the same playbook, same workflow. And keep that in mind. Oftentimes what we will say actually is every presentation layer have a different workflow. ServiceNow might have JavaScript or Slack, Python API, Ansible, a playbook. Really here, all of these demos are triggering the same playbook. So the workflow process is the same. And so in chat, the really nice thing is meant for the agility, real-time information, but we're still creating a ServiceNow ticket. So you're enabling another team to issue a change, but we're still going to be tracking that within the ticket, and we're still going to be getting that same feedback. All those pre-commands, all those post-commands, and things like that, we're now also going to see within chat. And all of this data can be as verbose or as minimal as needed to really make sure that it makes sense for a given business. Okay, cool. So in terms of chat integrations, Damien mentioned backups actually, and one of the things that super helpful is being able to execute a generic job as an example within Ansible. So just one that we can look at as an example is even net Ansible template. Here, Ansible has the notion of playbooks, but playbooks have job templates in AWX or Tower. We can literally pick any playbook that we have, and if we want to do a backup on the network, this is going to be a limit, so we can pick any group of devices or any device for that matter to go kick off that job. If we just pick some device here, this is now going to kick off that job to back up the devices. And in interest of time, we'll save the verification of it. But if we were to come back to all right, lost my. We'll trust that's going to go launch. I'm just trying to find. There's Ansible. Just that our backup is working. And again, it could be on a device, could be at night. Hey, from your phone, this is great. Even chat on your phone to go initiate this slash command to do a network backup in near real time. All right, cool. So in terms of demos, last one that I'll walk through is integration between NetBox and ServiceNow. So we're saving the deep dive on NetBox coming up in the next presentation. But things like dealing with multiple sources of truth, or devices are in one platform and another platform. What is an example workflow that we could use to make NetBox the source of truth, but still get that data and view that data within ServiceNow. So as an example, if we came back into NetBox, we go to our devices, we click add, we're gonna, we'll just, all right, can't type. We'll just put, name for now. We'll just say this is going to be, I'm going to be a core switch. We'll just, make me a Cisco device for the day and, do a CSR. And then what we're going to do is this currently, by process, must be offline. So we're going to say that's the human process. This must be an offline device, and then put this in New York City. When we click submit, or create, what we're going to see happen is we are going to come back to devices, and we are going to see that's still offline. We see the amber orange color. So my device is offline. If we jump back into our change requests, this is unordered, but we have right here added new device. If we were to open this, it's waiting for approval. I would then impersonate the approver right now, go approve the device, and after approval, it would then change the status in NetBox to active and then populate the CMDB in ServiceNow. This is why when you're automating with any kind of tool and querying NetBox for the data, you wouldn't want to return the offline devices. So with the approval process, you can then manage devices within NetBox. So if we were to go into this device and even make an edit, whatever it is, make that backbone, click update. Even those things, if we were to come back to our change requests, another one was opened. We actually see it tracked in ServiceNow that it was updated. So any change that we're making in NetBox, we're actually opening and closing a ticket in ServiceNow too. I think, if we're not one ourselves, or at one point in our career, maybe that, being a cowboy, is to make a change real quick. It could still help to track that within ServiceNow to just see exactly the state of the device. So if we go back to the updated change request, we're actually getting everything coming back in the API call from NetBox, so we can see the exact status of the device at that point in time. So pretty neat stuff there. All right, I'm going to skip one about custom fields and then show one about one more real quick for initiating a change in NetBox. Right, so there's the notion of things like webhooks. Talk about API calls a lot, but making an API call from ServiceNow to an automation engine, ServiceNow to Ansible. But think about a platform like NetBox, or it could be NMS platform or database, to make an outbound API call. So we'll call this our webhook that we're going to showcase. And if we were to go into the admin settings of NetBox, we'll look at webhooks. So we have one on VLAN create as an example. Other ones we saw already on device update and create. But VLAN create, we're now going to enable this webhook. This is saying on any creation of a VLAN, NetBox will make an API call to this URL, which is one of our custom web apps that we have in the cloud. So if we log out of the admin section of NetBox, we come into VLANs, we go to add. Let's just say VLAN ID 100, web, and let's just call this New York City for now. I think that's all I need. We'll just say create. Did that quick. Hopefully I didn't miss anything. Cool. So now this VLAN is running. So just adding that VLAN in NetBox is doing a real-time API call to a web app, and then we're brokering a configuration item down into Ansible. So when you think about that, you want to change the data, change the device, right? Data's changed first. And so one option is to use something like a webhook feature in a platform like NetBox to be able to change the data. It could be creation of a device, updating a device. Any object change within a platform like this could then initiate that outbound call. Okay. One thing I'll skip here
that's the push part, right?
The push to the device.
Push to the device.
Correct. Yeah. So NetBox here, the webhook is we added VLAN 100, whatever idea it was, that got sent into an API call into Ansible. Ansible takes VLAN ID, all the details, and then configures it on the device. I'm going to skip a piece of Ansible. So we're looking at different presentation layers of executing automation, and then ultimately it was Ansible. So this is just showing the consumption layer. If you want to have an IT administrator or network person run the job, then maybe these presentation layers might not make sense. So just be aware that there are different types of way to consume network automation. Okay.
Can I jump in for a quick question? Sorry, I know we're running behind, and I'll try to be super brief. Just to jump back, so a lot of the customers that I would help work with, and I think a lot of enterprises generally, are super interested in doing automation, right? And probably one of the first conversations I'm suspecting you have is, what are the tools and platforms that we need to have or use? And I understand the flexibility that you all have across all of the things, if you will, but how do you navigate that conversation with a customer, and what is it, if I may ask, what is it that you generally recommend they start to do? Because you're sitting in a position where you can, influence that decision,
right,
in terms of what platforms and tools and everything else that they go with. How do you navigate that, and can you talk just briefly about that?
I'll do a short answer now,
yeah,
and then maybe finish after NetBox or offline. I would say the short answer is, we mentioned earlier, our engagements should start with some level of discovery and assessment to be able to make broad recommendations. And again, case in point is really looking at, it could be teams, it could be culture, skill sets, what tools are already deployed. If certain tools are deployed, it might not make sense to rip and replace as an example. So a lot of what we're showing today could have been integrated with a variety of tools under the covers. And so before we were to make a recommendation, we would definitely want to understand a bit more about the environment, the workflows especially, to see what are the common pain points. And even, again, engineer to leader, what are the pain points? And it's surprising to get feedback from various folks in an organization, but we've heard things like, we don't have any workflows, or first and foremost, our biggest pain point is X, and we uncover it's something totally different. So I would say, we would want to engage and have that sit down with a variety of stakeholders to really make those recommendations.
When you talk with your customers, do you ever talk outside of the networking team so that the people who actually use the network understand their perspective of what is valuable to them? I would call those the front end users of the network.
Yeah, definitely. When we do our assessments, and we request to speak to all of their customers. And so you make the examples here: service desk, help desk, security, common, systems folks, developers, and it's very important. Not often thought about is automation is, how can you just minimize the amount of tickets going into a queue, as an example, versus thinking about it, what can I automate? And so what can I automate to actually minimize this queue? And so we definitely engage with as many teams as we can get access to, based on the engagement and the client.